Coming up, some end of summer fun unplugged in. This one with Nitin Mhatre, the CEO of Berkshire Bank. Now, with my fellow American Airlines frequent flyer and Cornerstone Advisors partner Steve Williams, I'm your host, Al Dominic, and we're back together to continue our discussion around the ever-evolving landscape of banking and leadership, and really, without question, what are some really uncertain and unprecedented times. Now, when I say uncertain and unprecedented, we're recording this on the heels of some pretty awesome announcements, like, the one with Liam and Noel Gallagher reconciling their differences to make some money on an upcoming Oasis tour that we're sure to dwarf what Taylor Swift has grossed. So, Steve, you want to take an over-under on what those two
I know there's already Vegas odds on will the brothers break up during the tour. So that shows you the fragility of things out there in the financial system and in rock and roll. But I'm excited because you and I have known Nitin for quite some time. And when we've talked on our podcast, there's banking, the balance sheet, credit risk, EPS, and then there's banking, technology, innovation, talent, new products, reaching new generations. I think we've got someone really who gets jazzed on that stuff, Al, like we do. So, Nitin, it's terrific to have you today.
Steve and Al, great to be with you guys. And thank you for your partnership with us and just the amount of information that you're able to share with the entire sector, which I think is incredibly powerful.
Well, it's very cool and rewarding to be able to just spend a little bit of time with you both. There's so much going on, not just in our industry, but really in our great country. We're sitting here kind of getting ready for the run up to the November election, which we all know was shaken up when President Biden announced he was dropping out. So, we have the uncertainty there, which impacts regulatory conversations, some of the compliance things. Obviously, it puts some of the M&A conversation into a bit of a blender. On the business of banking front, hard to overlook the continued slump in loan growth, which I know, persisted during the second quarter, really is into the third quarter so far. Although, we've got an anticipated rate cutting cycle by the Federal Reserve, which could, boost some credit demand. So, there's a lot of things that we could talk about and we could cover. But Steve and I really want to invite you into this conversation, Nitin, because we want to talk a little bit about this twin towers of transformation that impacts the tech side of your business and really the talent side. And, for listeners out there, Nitin is the CEO of a really incredible, bank up in New England and New York. I think you have 96 financial centers across kind of the Northeast at this point?
Yep.
Am I right in doing that type of math? About 12 billion in asset size?
That is correct.
So, you're not talking to somebody who just, kind of fakes it till he makes it. He's doing some really cool things. And, Steve and I try to do some cool things together as well. We try on occasion to listen to some music. Some of the songs picked today might be more in my wheelhouse and in Steve's and Nitin's, but we'll see. We've got 5 tracks to lay down and figure out if we can build off of them to talk the business of banking. So, just to give you a preview, we've got Marshall Tucker Band, we have Ice Cube, we have REO Speedwagon. Somebody who you probably haven't heard in a while is Trent D'Arby. And then, as I mentioned, our friends across the pond, we've got to finish with Oasis today. So those are 5 kind of musicians that are kind of waiting in the wings so that we can ghost against some lyrics to get into this conversation. You guys good with that playlist?
Oh, good with that. I'm happy to be hanging out with good crowd, it looks like.
Yeah. All right. Steve, you good with that?
I'm good. Let's jump in, but I disclose I will whistle on question number 4 to Terrence Trent. Just be ready.
Okay. Well, you can whistle when we're there, but the first one is I want to pull from Marshall Tucker Band, and I heard it in a love song because where you bank matters in finding solutions to your next adventure really matter. And those are really 2 of the digital welcome signs that Nitin and his bank puts out. And so when we think about who's doing some really interesting things across the industry, we look at Berkshire being recognized as one of the most trusted banks in America. And we're just curious, how do these messages reflect your culture and really tie into creating trust both online and in person?
And happy to. And Al, I think you introduced the bank really well. We're about $12.5 billion asset size company. But I think it's also important to remember it's a 177-year-old institution that has always been a purpose-driven, values-guided, community-dedicated institution and has built trust in the community over that period of time. right? So when we talk about where you bank matters, it's not just about creating that exceptional client experience that I think every bank is trying to build, but also continue to earn the trust of our clients. And you've got to do that across every conceivable channel that the clients want to operate out of, right? So I think the notion of where you bank matters and how we're getting recognized and also being recognized as the top 10 most trusted banks in the country is a reflection of the culture that the institution has had for over now decades. But what we've done is we've also talked about how we need to evolve as an institution because the consumer expectations have evolved rapidly, not just now, but over the last 5, 10, 15 years. But the pace of change is just remarkable. And I think the how technology has evolved, how technology has gotten democratized, and now with the new elements of AI and AGI and what that does to that part of the equation is going to be incredible. And what we're saying is, while we need to adapt to that and remain tech forward, we also need to make sure the core of who we are doesn't change and that our vision to be a high performing, relationship driven, community focused bank will not change. It'll evolve with the technology, it'll evolve with the client expectations, but the core does not change. And the core of how we build that relationship driven model is to earn the trust and continue to earn the trust of our clients. I believe, and this is more philosophical, relationships are based on trust. Trust is based on communication, and that communication is going to be constantly reminding ourselves and our clients about we will continue to provide exceptional service to you. We'll give you a personalized advice, and you have access to us, not just digitally, but also through our bankers and through management, and which is where a mid-sized bank differentiates better than a large bank, where I could go to a client or a prospect and say, hey, listen, we would love to earn your business. And guess what? Anytime you need any help, you can just call me. And here's my cell phone number. I think that makes a difference.
You know, Nitin and Al, I think you and I talk about this, but I'd encourage our listeners to check out how Berkshire is branding these days. And you've got the Berkshire One strategy going on. Really has, Al, a fintech flavor to it. You've got, hey, I open an account and I get streaming on Spotify. I can impact my green priorities out there. And I think it's really cool that you're doing that, Nitin. And I think you get something that's very important to me is we have to have a retail strategy to be that community bank in order to fund the business banking, the real estate. We have to have both. And we have to stay current with some of the fintech trends because that's how we preserve our liquidity.
And I was just going to add the other element of this is, and which sometimes gets kind of not being as prominent, is how is the banker experience evolving and how do you make that better? Because if the bankers have a great experience that reflects in the client experience, that reflects in the performance and shareholder value. And I think we're fortunate because we're getting recognized not just being the most trusted bank in America, but Newsweek and Time and Forbes also listed us amongst the greatest workplaces and the greatest mid-sized companies, most trustworthy, and greatest workplace. So it's all coming together really well.
Yeah, and you actually just took the words out of my mouth because so much of the conversation around building trust seems to be externally focused. But if you start and you take care of your own, they're your best brand ambassadors. It's the folks who are doing this every single day, who really care about the communities that they're a part of. They're the ones who model the behavior of a strong regional player like you all are.
You don't want a Gen Zer who works in a bank and goes, I can't believe these antiquated tools and I can't believe the horrible digital experience I'm supposed to give my customers. So yeah. I think that point about staying current in the workplace experience, it's something I'm hearing a lot, but I'm glad to hear you prioritizing that.
Yeah, and Steve, as you say that, there's a little crossover. If you wanted to hop onto Mary Wisniewski's podcast that we have, Money Isn't Everything, she just did a really interesting conversation. I had an interesting conversation with some folks who are looking at the Gen Z space and bring some data to the opportunities to really engage differently. Yeah. But, if we think about engaging differently, I've got to give, big time props to my man out in Arizona, Steve. You're a West Coast boy, right? Southern California.
SoCal.
So your Ice Cube knowledge is probably as good as mine. So you know how we do it here at Cornerstone, right? We're going to roll with some Ice Cube on this next question to Nitin, because it's been said that being a CEO today is kind of like living on the tip of a knife. It's a really delicate balancing act where you're struggling to stay relevant and to perform while at the same time seeking some of these new avenues for growth and change so you can stay competitive in the future. Now, I've been looking at some of your recent earning reports. I've seen you and your CFO emphasizing the bank's focus on growing loans, maintaining solid asset quality, preserving capital strength. But there's a lot that's tugging against that. So, we talk a little bit about, how you have kind of an eye on the expected hurdle rate for return on capital, which, is, I think, Steve, we look at it being around 12%. And then we find banks like Berkshire, not specifically, but like Berkshire, probably closer to 9%. So, like, how do you see banks being able to meet those financial expectations without shortchanging the future investments that you just said are so important?
And that's so crucial, right? I think you kind of said it well. The how do you balance the short term versus the long term? That's the question, right? And as Warren Buffett, once said, in the short term it's a voting machine, and in the long term it's a weighing machine, right? And I think the important part about this is even when we launched, about 3.5 years ago, our own transformation plan, and you guys played an important role in helping us with some of the benchmarking work there. We did talk about how will we optimize ourselves in order to invest into the future, right? So the optimization components included how do we optimize our channels? How do we optimize our processes? How do we optimize our geography? How do we optimize our businesses? How do we optimize our organizational structure? So I think all of that does create significant amount of efficiencies that we chose to reinvest into the future. And that reinvesting in the future was digitizing the cloud experience, the client experience, enhancing the value proposition, and the tech stack. And my team and I share the pride in saying we really truly have probably the top quartile, if not top decile, tech stack of the mid-sized banks. And the reason we were able to do that was because we invested in what I would say roughly 5 key components of the tech stack. We integrated into a centralized data warehouse through Snowflake. We completed our cloud migration. We brought in the middleware and API enablement platforms like MuleSoft together. We built the CRM platform through Salesforce, and then we conducted a partnership with FinTech Narmi to build a digital experience. So all of those 5 components have been kind of brought together, and I think that helped us invest into the future, and that's part of the reason why we're seeing the momentum that we've seen over the last 3 years, and hopefully some of that investment continues to pay forward. That's not to say it's done, because you have to constantly innovate and find efficiencies, and the newer elements of the AIs, the AGIs will also create opportunities for efficiency. But it's a constant balance, like you said, investing into the future, but you can only do it if you're able to find efficiencies along the way.
The industry's progressing when you have a CEO say Snowflake, Cloud, API, CRM, and Narmi all in one answer. So it shows tech coming to this industry in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. And, again, we were talking the twin towers of transformation, tech and talent. You just naturally lead us into this next one. Song I'm going to reference is by REO Speedwagon, and it's Take It on the Run, because they've got a line in there that says, and talk is cheap when the story is good. But, we also at Cornerstone...
And the tails grow taller on down the line.
Well, would you like to continue humming and singing with me? Because we can go karaoke if we need to. But again, talk is cheap when the story is good. And at Cornerstone, we've been talking a lot about a smarter bank and what are the components of a smarter bank. One of them is being opportunistic. And so both Steve and I really admire how you've been opportunistic on the talent front, because, despite your EPS being flat, over the, year on year at the bank, you've had a lot of really great press releases bringing in new senior level talent to the bank. My math is probably out of date because I've seen at least 11 seasoned bankers that you've grabbed in recent investor decks. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's more. And Steve, don't check my math because that's not ever been my true strength. But I'm just kind of curious, Nitin, like what gives you and the existing team so much confidence to add senior staff right now to your business?
One, I think we like the momentum that we have, and two, just as you asked previously about how do you continue to invest into the future, and technology is a large part of it. But at the same time, we recognize that ultimately it's still a people's business, and the talent matters, and the relationships that they bring with them matters. So what we've done is, and what also happened to happen in a way, is there's been a significant market disruption in New England market. There have been multiple M&As and mergers happening here that has created market disruption, which has been beneficial to a bank like us. Because what's happened in many cases is those banks have gotten larger. So the bankers have felt kind of their clients getting somewhat disenfranchised, right? So they want their clients to be treated the same way and serviced the same way with the same amount of connectivity. So they've gravitated towards banks like us, and we've been beneficiaries of that. So over a dozen new hires that you referenced to, we've been able to hire over the last couple of years are effectively bringing us that ability to bring in new clients and supplement the outstanding bankers that we've had for many, many years with us. So I think it is an investment into the future and connecting back to that talent and technology. So technology will continue to be invested in to be a differentiator and also the enabler for these bankers to deepen their relationships with the clients. And I think I'm excited. I get jazzed up about technology because to me, almost every CEO needs to be on the leading edge of technology because that's going to ultimately help you create better client experience. And technology has gotten democratized. So the largest bank in the country is talking about a particular platform, which is the same platform that a $1 or $2 billion asset size bank is using. So the access to technology has become really easy for those who want to adapt.
Yep. Music to Steve Williams' ears, right, Steve?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you can be progressive on technology, but Al, you and I were recently at a bank board meeting, and two things Nitin said came up with interesting. One was access to decision makers. So, talk about our size. One thing we can turn to our advantage as a mid-size or regional commercial bank is that access to decision makers. The other one that kind of goes with that, to your point about why would talent want to come, Nitin, is the partnership between the credit group and the frontline lenders. So they feel they can engage each other. They can get quick to decisions. It's not this antagonistic black hole they have to work through to get credit approved. We're seeing that those entrepreneurial banks really spend time to make sure the credit sales partnership is functional and they know the role that each of them plays.
Yeah, and Steve, you mentioned some of the strategic planning that we've worked on together for various banks. I'm thinking also about some of our conversations around board retreats.
Yeah,
We've helped to facilitate. We've come up with I don't want to say it's a novel concept, but internally we talk return on tech as a really strategic conversation. It's expensive. It's got risk, reputational and operational tied in with it. There's expense that makes board members say, "Are we getting what we really expect to from our our relationships and partnerships?" So, Steve, I promised Terrence Trent D'Arby, and his song "Wishing Well." Okay, there you go, Nitin. We told you things would be a little funny here.
It's not working.
But
yeah, I'm just dry. Bailey can't give me the water. We're on camera. It's too late.
Probably hot out in Arizona right now.
It's so hot.
So hot. We got to bring this back in because I want to talk about this concept of return on tech. So, let's pretend for a second that Steve and I are on your board, and we say, "Hey, love what you're doing, but are we getting the real return on what we've already spent to keep us moving forward?" How do you really substantively answer that question?
And what we do and what we have been doing, and I think it's gathered more momentum going forward, is we're able to break it into the areas where it is making an impact. So I think I'll start with the macro view of this. Is we used to look at what portion of our technology dollars getting spent in running the bank or keep the lights on versus what portion is going into changing the bank, right? And that used to be roughly, I'm using rough numbers, about 80% was keep the lights on, 20% for innovation or change the bank. I'm proud to say, as of last update that we did, we're almost 75% has changed the bank and 20-25% run the bank. So that is fantastic, and that's been conscious decision. Those 5 components of investment that we talked about has enabled us to keep the lights on component of it is smaller. Now, so now change the bank component. How do you track it and how do you measure it? And I think we continue to break it into 2 components. Okay, how is the banker experience changing and improving as a result of investments in technology. And that has two elements to it. One is, are the frontline bankers bringing more revenue per client? Are the relationships per client getting deeper, longer, and broader, right? So I think there is a way to compute the revenue per client that's coming through bankers that are getting support through the technology element of it. The non-client facing bankers, you track it through efficiency. So how many files or widgets and are we able to process per client, per banker, right? I think so. Those are, I think, relatively easy to track and measure, and that's kind of a function of the investment. The other side of this is the clients themselves and the investment in technology. How is it helping us improve the revenue per client? How is it helping us have more products and services per client? And how do you track that and continue to track that? And then the other side is also, how do you reduce the expenses of cost per account, cost per acquisition? And so I think the traditional components still exist, but how do you bring it all and roll it up together into that return on technology? And some part of the benchmarking work that you guys did for us was helpful as well, because we were able to break it into some of these individual components, and that has helped us look at it with a fresh set of eyes.
And like that was not a self-serving question, but I appreciate the nod to the Cornerstone team. Yeah. But again, I just think that in the old days, it was like you just kind of toss a quarter into the wishing well and hope you get something good. And even as you're talking about reporting structure, you think about tech in the old days, it would report to the CFO and it would be considered more of a cost to be contained. Now you're looking at it from an investment, so you can start again at the board level to show certain trend lines that give you confidence that you're making the progress that you need.
Yeah, and bringing that transparency to the boardroom. The old Edward Deming, you can't manage what you can't measure. And, it's kind of, that sounded like Jeff Bezos quoting about cost per account and revenue per banker. We geek out on that stuff. But I think bringing that up to the board, to your point, to give them that confidence is really important. I was going to ask you, I remember we've got Tom Brown's Second Curve CEO conference coming up. I remember one time you talking, Nitin, there about another measure is just what is my pull through and my volume on digital account opening, and how are we driving kind of that new market. So that's another example of just, are we really opening the digital front door?
Yeah. Now, Steve, as you're saying all this, I got to walk it back. I didn't know that you were on a first name basis with Dr. Deming. Like, that's pretty cool.
Oh, I was part of rebuilding Japan after World War II. I didn't know if you knew that. Yes, absolutely.
You learn something new unplugged in every time. All right, we got to wrap this up because we're starting to get a little feisty here. But I said we're going to give a nod to the lads up in Manchester, where, depending on where you are in the country, over to your right. So Oasis is going to take us home with just the wonderful "Live Forever," echoing in at least my mind as we talk about, again, getting smarter with data, being nimble and opportunistic. We talk also, one of Ron Shevlin's favorite terms, about being hyper efficient, and one of mine is being differentiated. But Nitin, I just want to ask you, just again broadly, given your view, regional and community banks need to work with a greater sense of purpose, and they've got to become faster in making decisions. But the risk is you get sideways with regulatory expectations and, like, even worse, compliance requirements. So, like, again, it's the balancing act. How do you talk to your team about just working with that pace without getting accidentally sideways with anyone?
So that's a great question. And I think you touched upon something that I feel I should expand on a little bit. I think you used the word purpose. And I think that's important to us as an institution. We believe that purpose and performance can not just coexist, but can be actually complementary, that amplifies your shareholder value. And I think we've been driven by that. And even as part of the transformation, when we talked about financial performance transformation, we also talked about client experience transformation and our ESG performance, which we're now literally in the 17th percentile nationally of all institutions that Bloomberg, MSCI, Sustainalytics, and ISS track. So we're proud of it. Coming back to your question about, so how do you leverage, how do you truly become a smart bank that leverages technology without kind of getting tangled into the regulatory elements of this? And I think there are pretty relatively cleaner use cases that we're looking to embrace. So when it comes to the client-facing activities, we are looking to use technology for next likely product, right? And how do you do that? And how do you develop the platforms to be able to support that? we've been able to do marketing A/B testing using some of the technology. And those things are not really in the hairs of regulatory things. So I think that just makes us smarter in terms of client acquisition and client experience. There are components within underwriting, and which is where it could get a little caught up in the, if you try to be too cute about it, you could get tangled into the regulatory stuff. You could get into the the adverse impact and all of that stuff. So I think we're being careful in that space, but we are certainly looking at opportunities, especially within the small business/business banking area, where we believe there is significant amount of opportunities to be able to streamline those processes on underwriting and client onboarding more effectively. And the third one, which I think is broadly being looked at by the industry, is the space of BSA AML. And I think those areas have certainly been, tested in different ways in different platforms, whether it's the good old, RPA to the new AI, AGI kind of elements. I think all banks are trying to do that, and we're also looking to explore it. And we've launched a couple of pilots and MVPs, and hoping to get that to a place where we would be effective. And the fourth one, which is sometimes get lost in the background, but I think it's crucial if you're trying to be efficient, is procurement. And this notion of most banks our size have just a very large number of suppliers that you manage. And how do you bring that, centrally and manage that? And we, again, I don't want to, necessarily be the brand ambassador for anybody, but we use ServiceNow. And I think that has helped us bring it all together into centralized place where now we can track every supplier and partner, and when the contracts come up for renewal, so you're able to negotiate well before you have to sign the renewal next week kind of situation. So I think those things are helpful, and most of these outside of the underwriting elements are not where you could trip yourself with the regulators.
Yeah. Al, when I hear ServiceNow, that's kind of, I wrote recently about the systems of smarter banks, that you've got to create repeatable process, data driven. The one thing that regulators don't like is when they can't see a consistent pattern of data or a repeatable process. So I think the opportunity you're bringing up is, if I mature my systems and my data and my consistency, I can be transparent to my regulator a lot more easily. And I can apply new use case tools that keep me compliant for BSA and other things. That's the hard work, is to build those systems that can produce data for the business, but also can produce data for risk and regulation.
It is. And just on, since we're talking about regulatory, kind of component as well, to me, we talk about relationships, and I treat us regulators as our partners as well. So we engage with the regulators, talk about what we're thinking about well ahead of time. I get on a call every month with our, primary regulators and talk about everything, not just what we're doing or have done, but also what we're thinking about. In many cases, we get real good quality feedback that has been helpful in building some of these, programs and platforms.
No, and I think that it's awesome that you're socializing ideas. You're, encouraging people to think more broadly than just in their, existing way of doing business. Steve was whistling to work. I could try to whistle, but I'm afraid that we might really embarrass both of ourselves here. So, okay, the mic is working, but I think we should probably call it a day and thank Nitin Mhatre for joining Steve Williams and myself, Al Dominic, on this episode of Plugged In. It's always a treat to talk to a great bank CEO, especially one who's as comfortable talking tech as he is about talent. So Nitin, from all of us, thanks so much for your time.
Alan, great. Thank you for your time. Thank you for everything that you do. And I think the impact you're making, for partners like us and the broader sector.
Yeah, and I would just close by saying you can't sit with Nitin and not know the sincerity that bleeds through when he talks about purpose. It's really fabulous, and I can see your organization responding to that, Nitin. So congratulations on that. It's a really special thing.
Thank you very much, Steve. Have a good one. Be well.
Thank you.